Greetings and welcome to another Dev Bootstrap screencast. In this screencast, we're going to cover the interplanetary file system, and we're going to cover an example of a Vue JS application, a very simple one that uses Ipfs, and we're going to connect to a locally running Ipfs daemon, and we're going to save a file to our local Ipfs running daemon, which will then push to the network. We'll also, in our application, be pushing the CID that is returned from the Ipfs API, that is the content identifier, and we're going to be pushing that to a smart contract. And this, in a sense, simulates the idea of being able to reference certain files in the blockchain, but without having to store the entire file content on the blockchain, and rather that we use Ipfs. And final thing in the mix is going to be Drizzle. So let's get started. So this is the application that we're going to develop. It's basically, as I mentioned, it's an Ipfs Vue JS demo application. Now let's just run through this really quickly here. So the user will come over to the Vue JS app, which will be running on localhost for our intents and purposes, and they will be able to select a file. And so they will click on a button to select a file, which will open up their local operating system file system chooser, their file chooser. In our case, it's going to be Finder because we're using Mac. And I'll choose one of these files and I'll select the file. This will then basically, it will add that file to a property in our Vue JS app, and it will basically buffer that file to that property. And then we can click this Upload to Ipfs button, and that will do two things. It's going to first push the file using the add API method of Ipfs to the Ipfs running instance on our local machine. And it's going to create this content identifier, this rather long hash, basically. It's a hash of the file that we are saving. And it's also going to set in a smart contract on a locally running blockchain the same content identifier. So the same CID is going to be here and here. And the purpose of this is to simulate the idea of being able to add content that is quite large. It could be a large document. It could be something that is just maybe needs to be private. And Ipfs provides a great way to do this. It's a distributed network of nodes acting in a similar way to something like BitTorrent. So this is really this is our architecture. This is what we're going to build in this demo. Now, before I start, just want to take you over to the Ipfs website, which is ipfs.io, and we just click on how it works, which takes us down here. I just want to run through very quickly how it works, but this is not really going, the purpose of this screencast is not really to delve deep into the workings of Ipfs. It's just to show you how we can actually connect everything together using Vue JS and Truffle and the blockchain. But basically, what happens is whenever you add a file to Ipfs, everything in your file is then given a fingerprint, a unique hash. And the beauty of that is that when you hash files, if you know or familiar with hashing, it means that duplicates are all automatically removed, because whenever you hash a file that is exactly the same as another file, so let's say I upload the same file twice, it will end up having the same hash and will not need to be stored multiple times. Only the hash and the reference to the actual file needs to be stored. Then it's split across network nodes to make the downloading and distribution of the file more efficient and more resilient. And there are various lookup methods that allow us to look up files using a system called IPNS, which we won't go into right now. So in our application, what we're going to do is basically use Ipfs from our local machine. And we can do that by installing it. And if you want to follow along, you can go to this page, which is from the home page, and you can click on your operating system and follow the instructions here. And when you're done, you should be able to do the command ipfs version to see what version you're running, which I can do right now. I can just run ipfs -- version, and you can see we're running 0.50. Now, as always, the example app is on our Dev Bootstrap repository. You can check it out here. It's Ipfs Vue JS Drizzle App. And if you're not familiar with some of these terms like Drizzle, for example, do check it out. I'll throw another video together to explain this in more detail, go through the various components of Drizzle and so on. But for now, let's get started with building this app. So, first things first, what I need to do, and what I want to do actually in this video is go through the full setup process. So if we look at this directory, you'll see that we've only got node modules and a package.json file in here. And this is just because I installed earlier, I just installed a couple of things. What did I install? Let's have a look here. I installed Truffle. I installed the Node.js long-term support version of Truffle. And I also installed Vue CLI. So these are already installed. What I want to do now is initiate a new Truffle project. So if we go Truffle and Truffle init, this will initialize a new project. Okay, so proceed, and we will download the Truffle box. That's fantastic. And what I'm going to also do is I'm going to create a new Vue JS app. And this is going to be inside the same directory. So it's going to go inside a directory called app. And I'm going to manually select that I want TypeScript and I want to use Vuex. I'm going to use class components. And I'm going to use that and with error prevention, and we're going to lint on save, and we're going to use dedicated config files, and we're all good to go. And that will create our app. All right. Looks like everything has been installed for our Vue JS app. Let's clear the screen here and install the next thing. So what I want to do is create a contract to store our CID, and I'm going to create something called a simple IPFS store. This is a contract that will store the CID, as mentioned before and in the diagram. Next up is a migration. This is a new migration that will basically migrate our contracts to the blockchain. Okay, and I'm going to head over to our editor and take a look at the project as it looks like so far. And you can see here this is what our command created for us. So what we're going to do is I'm going to fill in this contract with the various parts that we need, and it's not very much, right? So we need a string to store our CID, and that's that. I'll leave the constructor there where it is, and we want a function so that will allow us to set the CID. So we're going to pass that in, maybe underscore CID. It's going to be a public function, and we're going to set the local stored variable in the contract to the passed in, and we want to have another function that we can use to get the CID, and that's also going to be a public function. It's going to be a view, and it's going to return the string, and that just simply returns the CID from the contract. And that's it. Very simple contract there that we need. Okay, next up is the migration that we created. So here we've got this boilerplate migration, and what we want is to bring in the artifacts so that we can do a migration. So this is going to be the simple IPFS store, and it's from our artifacts require, and it's going to be the simple IPFS store artifact. And in here what I want to do is use the deployer, deploy method passing in the store that we want to deploy. Okay, so that should be it for that. So what we can do is go to the terminal down here and we can just try to compile this. So truffle compile. Okay, so that compiled successfully, and that's put the built contracts, the artifacts in here, all right? Again, if you need to understand and go through a little bit more about truffle, then that's certainly going to be a separate video, which I can put together as well. Now, here I'm going to create a symlink. This is how to create a symlink. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to create a symlink to the built contracts file into the app source contracts folder. So what that means is if we take a look at this now and we go into app source, you'll see that there's this symlink here which links back to the contracts. And that allows us to make use of these contracts whenever they're built inside of our app. So you see here it's just a symlink back to this. So whenever these are built, we will get hold of those nice and quickly and easily. Okay, so let's, moving on, let's go into our app now, because we want to shift focus over there now so that we can start building our application. Now, there are a few things that we need to actually install, and one of them, of course, is the Vue plugin, the Drizzle Vue plugin. This is a plugin that allows us to very easily connect our Vue application with a smart contract running on the blockchain. It basically acts as a wrapper around Web3 and has a bunch of user interface components and a bunch of APIs that really make it easier to bring in instances of contracts and call methods on those contracts and initiate transactions and so on and so forth. So that's installing. Okay, looks like that has installed, so let's clear that out and let's install the Ipfs HTTP client next. This is the JavaScript library that allows us to integrate with Ipfs, and we'll look at how we configure that in just a second once this has completed its installation. Okay, looks like that has installed. Let's install one final piece, which is node types that we need for TypeScript. Okay, that's installed. So now I'm going to create a couple of files that we need for working with Truffle and working with TypeScript. So the first file I'm going to create is a file called Drizzle Options. And I'm also going to create another file called dex.dts. And this will all become clear in a second. So another thing that we need to do is let's basically, I think what we should do right now is go ahead and open up our Drizzle options and configure Drizzle so that we can actually start working with this app. So I'm going to just drop in the configuration that we're going to use here. And so what we're doing is we're going to import the simple Ipfs store contract, and we're going to configure Web3 to look at our locally running blockchain here, running on port 8545. That will be Ganache. And we're going to basically expose the contracts through this endpoint here, contracts. Now, one thing you'll notice is there's a little bit of a problem here, and if I hover over it, it says that we can't really import this module. We can't import JSON. And there is actually a solution to that in the README, and what we need to do is we need to open up the tsconfig file. So let's open that, the tsconfig. And we need to add, and this is, again, this is from the README, so we need to add resolve JSON module. So we'll just put this here, resolve JSON module, and we need to set that to true, like that. And now if we head back over to Drizzle options, that should go, right? So next, what we want to do is open up our main. So if we go into our main, and we need to start importing some of the things that we need for getting this application to work. So we'll start with the Drizzle Vue plugin. And this is coming from Drizzle Vue plugin. Excellent. And then we want to import Drizzle options. From Drizzle options, like so. All right. Now, okay, that's fine. So then we want to use these components. So we just say that we want to use the Drizzle Vue plugin, and we want to make use of a store. Sorry, and Drizzle options. Okay, cool. Now, that's it for our main, and you might wonder what store, and store is basically Vuex store, right, which is under store index. So that's fine. Okay, now let's head over to the main app file here, which happens to have this hello world in it, and I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to remove that from here as well. And I'm going to say, well, okay, let's set up some computed properties. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to get a state from Drizzle or a Boolean from Drizzle to know whether or not it has been correctly initiated or not. And one way of doing this, and I can get rid of this import here as well, is to use map getters from our Vue X, so Vue X. Okay, and that should be map getters. And I can use map getters here to retrieve certain components, and this needs to be split, and then I can run. Then I can fetch Drizzle. Whoops, Drizzle, and then I can fetch the is Drizzle initialized property, like so. And then I can basically start using it in my Vue. So if I create a VF block here, and I say is Drizzle initialized, then this part here will not show unless it's initialized, unless Drizzle is ready. And I can put another div here that says that uses the velse, and I can say, let's just put in here, let's just put loading or something like that, right? So we can just say, you know, loading app. All right, okay. And now I can also show you a nice Drizzle component, which is a component that shows us the accounts that are attached to the app via MetaMask. So this is Drizzle account, and we can say that we want the units of the balance to be in Ether, and we want the precision to be 2 decimal places, and that gives us a nice way of being able to show an account. So what I can do now is maybe we can check this and see if it's working okay. So we can head back over here, and in order to get all of this working, I need a few consoles open at the same time. And if you check the README, you can see that there are a few things, as I say, that we need to do. So I'm going to start Ganache with a specific mnemonic, as shown here. This is just so that I can get the same accounts every time. Okay, those accounts there. And then I'm going to, in a different window, run truffle console, like so. Up here in this top right corner, I'm going to go into my app. And back here though, we've got a little error, which is basically we need to go into our networks. So let's do that. Let's go into truffle config, and we need to expose the development network so that will run. And try that again. Now in our app folder, what I need to do is run npm I just to make sure everything is installed and set up there. And meanwhile, over in the truffle config, I can run compile, and I can run migrate reset. That will deploy our contracts to the locally running blockchain here. As you can see here, the transactions were added and mined to the blockchain locally there. And then I can run npm run serve in my app over here, which should start up the development server. And the final thing I need to do is actually run an Ipfs Daemon. So Ipfs Daemon. And we don't need that just yet, but well, we will need it when we complete this, but for now we haven't added anything related to Ipfs in our application. This is just to see that we are working. Okay, it looks like it's started up here on port 8081. Meanwhile, I just realized I made a typo here. So is drizzle initialized was incorrectly spelt earlier, so that's been corrected now. So if we head over to localhost 8081 in a new browser window here, so localhost 8081, we can see here that it picks up the account of my wallet, and it picks up my Brave wallet, which is the one I've got loaded here in my Brave browser. So you can see I'm connecting to localhost 8545, which is my local Ganache. And I've got 99.9909 Ether, which should be the same balance that's shown here, as you can see here, right? And we're showing it only to 2 decimal places. That's why we don't see the full amount there. Let's open up the terminal console here in the browser just so that we can see what's going on. As you can see, there's no errors, and we've got a few user messages and so on. So that's a good sanity check. The app is connected up and running. So we got everything running in these 4 windows. Ganache, we got truffle console over here, we've got our app running, and we got Ipfs running right down the bottom there. So what do we need to do next? Well, I think we need to create a new component that is going to basically give us our Ipfs functionality. So what I'm going to do is cheat a little and open up the components folder here and create a new component called Ipfs form.vue, like so. Okay, now I have this new file, Ipfs form.vue. I'm going to just quickly copy and paste this content in here. And this has a section in the template, a form section, that allows us to select a file. It doesn't, there's no functionality in here yet to send the file to Ipfs. This is purely the client-side part of this functionality that I want to show you. So we have an input type of type file, and we have an on-change handler which gets called, this is the method here, when the file change is selected, so when the file changes here. And what this does is it makes use of APIs in the browser to basically read the file as an array buffer and set that to a local variable here on our store. And just for interest, I actually console log this out so we can take a look at it. So if we head over to our browser, we can now select a file. Let's say we select this image, which is the Bitcoin Genesis block. And at the moment, we can't upload this to Ipfs, but you'll notice here in the console that it output the state of the buffer field here, which is this uint8 array. And basically, this is our file converted to a binary, an array of uint8 values, so that we can then pass that to our Ipfs API. And speaking of which, let's take a look at the Ipfs documentation for JavaScript. If you head over to this repository here and scroll down to Core API Docs and then go into the Files Markdown documentation, we can see here that we got the Files API for JavaScript, and we're going to make use of this method here, the Ipfs add method. So if I click on that, we can see some interesting properties of the API. And we can see that the data object here can be either a file content object or a file object. And it turns out that the file object is just a JavaScript plain object, and it has a bunch of properties here, including a property that is the file content object. And a file content is actually one of these, and we notice here that it's a type of uint8 array is one of the accepted types. And that is, if we head back to the console here, we can see that that is the type that we have. So that means that we can now pass our buffer, the value that's in our buffer, directly to this method as a uint8 array. So let's go back to our code and add that functionality into this class. I'm going to grab the full version of this class here. And what I've added here is a button to submit the file to Ipfs. I've added an Ipfs class, and I've added the onSubmit method here to make this all happen. And so this button here, when you click it, it calls onSubmit, which is this method here. And I basically check if the buffer has any value. So if the buffer doesn't have a value, this will not do anything. And if it does, we're going to call the Ipfs service add method, passing in the value of the buffer. As mentioned before, the add API on Ipfs allows us to pass in a uint8 array, which is what we have here as per our console. And then we update our local variable, the CID variable, and we use that to display in our Vue JS app the value of the Ipfs CID. And then here we are calling our smart contract to send that value to the contract in our locally running blockchain. So we're using Drizzle here. Again, I'm not going to go into Drizzle. I can make other videos and cover Drizzle later. But basically, we're getting an instance of the contract as per our configuration and as per our compilation in Truffle. And we're just calling the set method, and we're sending that off as a transaction with the CID string that's returned from Ipfs. So essentially here we're connecting the two worlds together, Ipfs and the blockchain. And we just reset the buffer to null so that we are not able to keep calling this method over and over again. So where does this Ipfs service come from? Well, if we scroll up, we can see that we're importing it from the store folder. If we go into the store folder, earlier I added Ipfs, which is basically this code here. We simply import the Ipfs instance from the Ipfs HTTP client library. We then create a new instance of that by passing in the localhost 5001 location for our locally running Ipfs service, and then we export it. So it's as simple as that. So we've basically got a handle on this on this instance now inside of our component, and we set that here, and then we use it as an instance of the Ipfs service so that we can call add and other methods on it. Okay, so if we head over to our browser, we can see now that it's been updated and we have no errors, and we can now choose a file as we had done before. So we choose the same image, the blockchain image of the Bitcoin Genesis block, and there is our buffer, and now we can hit the submit file to IPFS. So we have a moment of truth here. Let's just check our wallet is set correctly to Ganache. Yes, it is. And we have Ganache running. Yes, we do. Okay, so let's hit the button. And I'll bring up the notification window here. We can see here that we're being asked to pay some gas, but the transaction itself is free of charge. So let's click confirm, and we should see a notification that the transaction was successful. And if we look at Ganache, we can see here the transaction. And if we look here, we can see the IPFS CID. So let's quickly go into Truffle and let's have a look. If we go to networks, we can see the address of where our contract is deployed. So let's say let IPFS contract equal await simple IPFS store deployed. Okay, and then I can do IPFS contract get, and we see the same CID has now been persisted in our contract on the blockchain. So that's really great. So if we check over here, we can see that the web UI of our local IPFS is running on localhost port 5001/web UI. Let's grab that. And if we grab that, we've got our IPFS here, and we can now take this CID and we can put that in here and have a look. And it says it can't be previewed, but we can download it, and there we go. It's the file that we uploaded in our Vue JS app, which is the Bitcoin Genesis block. Just an image that I stored myself. But this is the full application for the purpose of this demo. Basically, we can choose any files. We can then save them over to IPFS. We get our CID back. We can then use that to view the file in IPFS. Of course, we can use the command line, the IPFS command line interface to fetch our data back from the IPFS nodes. And that's about it. That wraps up our screencast for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit. If you followed along, that's great. If you didn't and you just took the source code, that's fantastic. I'll leave all the links in the notes below, and I hope to see you again soon. Please take care. Please like, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.